Today we are going to talk about one of the most important events in Asian history. It is called the Meiji Restoration. It happened in Japan in the late 1800s. In a very short time, Japan changed almost everything about itself. The government changed. The economy changed. The culture changed. It is a very dramatic story.
I have heard the name before, but I do not really know what it means. Why was it so important?
Great question. Before the Meiji Restoration, Japan was a very closed country. For about 250 years, Japan did not talk to most other countries. But then, suddenly, foreign ships arrived, and everything started to fall apart. Japan had to decide, change, or disappear. The story of how Japan chose to change is truly remarkable.
So this documentary is about that change?
Yes. We will look at how it started, how Japan transformed itself, and what it meant for the rest of Asia. There are good parts and difficult parts to this story. We will look at both.
So where does the story begin?
It begins in 1853. Imagine you are living in Japan. Life has been the same for over 200 years. Then one day, you look at the sea and you see something you have never seen before. 4 large black ships. They are making dark smoke. They have big guns. And they are not Japanese.
That sounds very scary. Where did they come from?
They came from the United States. The ships were led by a man named Commodore Matthew Perry. He came with a simple message. Open your ports to trade or face the consequences.
And what did Japan do?
Japan had no choice. Their military technology was very old. They could not fight those ships, so they agreed. In 1854, Japan signed a treaty with the United States, and soon after, they signed more treaties with other Western countries.
Was that a problem?
A very big problem. These treaties were not equal. Japan had to give Western countries special rights. For example, Western people in Japan did not have to follow Japanese law. Japan also could not control its own import taxes. Japanese people felt this was deeply unfair.
I can understand that. So people were angry?
Very angry. And this anger created a political movement. People started to say, we must respect the emperor and push out the foreigners. In Japanese, this idea is called sono joi. The emperor had existed for a long time, but he had very little real power. The shogun, the military ruler, had the real power. But now people were saying the shogunate was weak. It could not protect Japan.
So ordinary people started to question the government?
Yes, and not just ordinary people. Lower-class samurai started to become politically active. They were educated, they had swords, and they were angry. These men would become the leaders of the revolution that was coming. The shogunate had ruled Japan for 250 years, but now its authority was falling apart, piece by piece.
So what happened next? Did the shogunate just collapse?
Not immediately. It was a slow and painful process. 2 powerful regions in Japan, Satsuma and Choshu, decided to work together against the shogunate. This alliance is called the Satsuma-Choshu Alliance, or in Japanese, Sacho-Domei. These 2 regions had modern weapons and strong leaders. They wanted to give power back to the emperor.
Did the shogun fight back?
He tried. But in 1867, the last shogun, a man named Tokugawa Yoshinobu, made a surprising decision. He gave his power back to the emperor. This event is called Taisei Hokan, which means the return of political power. It sounds peaceful, but it was not really peaceful.
Why not?
Because many samurai who supported the old shogunate did not want to give up. They believed in the old system. So a civil war began. This war is called the Boshin War. It lasted from 1868 to 1869. The new imperial forces won.
And what happened after the war?
Japan entered a new era. The emperor moved from Kyoto to Edo, and the city of Edo was renamed Tokyo, which means Eastern Capital. A new era name was chosen, Meiji, which means enlightened rule. Japan now had a new government, a new capital, and a new direction.
It sounds like everything changed very fast.
Incredibly fast. And the people who led this change were mostly young samurai in their 20s and 30s. They had defeated the old system. Now they had to build something completely new. And they were looking at the Western world for ideas. That is where our next part of the story begins.
So Japan had a new government. But what did they actually do? How do you change a whole country?
That is exactly the right question. The new Meiji leaders knew one thing very clearly. If Japan wanted to survive, it had to become modern. And at that time, modern meant Western. So they started to change everything. And they changed it very fast.
What did they change first?
One of the first and most important changes was called Heihan Chiken. This means abolishing the old domains and creating prefectures. Before this, Japan was like many small kingdoms. Each region had its own lord, its own army, its own rules. The Meiji government ended all of that. Now there was one central government with real power over the whole country.
So it became one unified nation?
Exactly. And along with that, they abolished the old class system. For centuries, samurai were at the top. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants were below them. And at the very bottom were people called Ita and Hinin, who were treated very badly. The new government said everyone is equal under the law. Samurai lost their special privileges. They could no longer carry swords in public.
That must have been a huge shock for the samurai.
It was. But the government did not stop there. They wanted to learn everything about the Western world. So in 1871, they sent a very large group of officials and students to Europe and America. This group is called the Iwakura Mission, named after its leader, Iwakura Tomomi. About 50 officials and 60 students traveled for nearly 2 years.
What did they see?
They saw factories, railroads, hospitals, universities, courts, and parliaments. They studied how Western governments worked, how Western economies functioned, how Western schools educated children. Some members of the mission were deeply shocked. They realized how far behind Japan was, and they became determined to catch up.
And when they came back, they built those things in Japan?
Yes, very quickly. Japan built its first railway in 1872, connecting Tokyo and Yokohama. A national postal system was created. A modern school system was introduced, with the goal that every child in Japan should receive an education. And, perhaps most importantly, a military draft was introduced. Before, only samurai could be soldiers. Now, any man could be called to serve in the army.
So even farming families had to send their sons to the military?
Yes, and this was a deeply symbolic change. The sword was no longer the symbol of power. The modern rifle was. Japan was building a Western-style nation at extraordinary speed. In just a few decades, it transformed from a feudal society into a modern state. It was one of the most rapid national transformations in history.
So Japan became modern. But what happened after that? Did they just focus on developing their own country?
Unfortunately, no. This is where the story becomes more complicated and more painful. As Japan grew stronger, some leaders started to think about expansion. They looked at what Western empires were doing in Asia and around the world, and some of them wanted Japan to do the same thing.
They wanted to build an empire?
Yes, and the first big debate was about Korea. Some powerful figures in the new government argued that Japan should invade Korea. This idea is called Sekenron, which means the argument for conquering Korea. They believed Korea was being disrespectful to Japan, and that Japan needed to show its strength.
Did Japan invade Korea at that time?
Not immediately. There was a strong debate inside the government. Some leaders said, "We are not ready yet. We need more time to develop Japan first." The invasion idea was rejected for the moment. But the men who lost that debate were very angry. Some of them left the government and started rebellions.
What kind of rebellions?
The most famous one is called the Satsuma Rebellion, or Seinen War, in 1877. It was led by a man named Saigo Takamori. He was one of the great heroes of the Meiji Restoration, but he became deeply unhappy with the direction Japan was taking. He felt the samurai spirit was being destroyed. He led a large army of former samurai against the government.
Did he win?
No, the government's modern army defeated him. Saigo Takamori died in the battle, but he became a symbol of the old samurai values and of resistance to rapid change. In Japan, many people still respect him today.
So the samurai era was truly finished after that?
Yes, the old warrior class was gone, but the military was not gone. It was just transformed. Japan now had a modern Western-style army, and it started to use that army. In 1876, Japan forced Korea to sign the Treaty of Ganghwa. This treaty opened Korean ports to Japanese trade and gave Japan special rights in Korea, similar to the unfair treaties Japan itself had suffered from the Western powers.
So Japan did to Korea what Western countries did to Japan.
That is a very important observation. And it did not stop there. China and Japan fought a war from 1894 to 1895. This is called the Sino-Japanese War, or in Korean and Japanese, Cheonggil-jongjang or Nishin Senso. Japan won quickly and decisively. China had to give up Taiwan and pay a large amount of money to Japan. It was a shocking result for all of Asia.
Why was it shocking?
Because China was seen as the great power of Asia. It had one of the oldest and most respected civilizations in the world. And Japan, a much smaller country, defeated it in just a few months. The world took notice.
And then Japan fought Russia too, right?
Yes. In 1904 and 1905, Japan fought Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. At that time, Russia was one of the largest empires in the world. Everyone expected Russia to win, but Japan won again. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian nation defeated a major European power. Japan was now a recognized world power, but the path it was on was becoming very dangerous for Japan and for all of its neighbors.
So Japan became a great power. But what happened after that? What is the long-term legacy of the Meiji Restoration?
That is the most important question of all. And the answer is not simple. The Meiji Restoration was one of the most extraordinary events in modern history, but it left behind both very positive things and very painful things.
Let us start with the positive side. What did Japan achieve?
Think about where Japan started. In 1853, it was a feudal country with samurai and swords, almost completely isolated from the world. By 1905, just 50 years later, it had defeated two major world powers. It had railways, universities, a modern legal system, a constitution, and one of the strongest armies in Asia. No other non-Western country had done anything like this.
So Japan proved that modernization was not only possible for Western countries.
Exactly. That is perhaps the most significant legacy. For many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that were struggling under Western pressure, Japan became a symbol of hope. It showed that a non-Western country could study, adapt, and compete as an equal with the most powerful nations on Earth. Many leaders in Asia looked at Japan and felt inspired.
But you said there was a dark side too.
Yes, a very dark side. The same nationalist energy that drove Japan to modernize also began to transform into something dangerous. The Meiji government had built a very strong military. It had also built a very strong sense of national pride. Over time, some leaders began to use that pride to justify aggression toward other countries.
When did that start to happen?
It was a gradual process. After the victories against China and Russia, Japan's military became very confident, perhaps too confident. The idea grew that Japan had a special mission in Asia, to lead Asia, to dominate Asia. This thinking became more and more extreme in the early 20th century.
And that eventually led to the Second World War.
Yes, the militarism that caused so much destruction in World War II had deep roots in the Meiji period. The structures that the Meiji leaders created, the emperor as a symbol of absolute loyalty, the powerful military, the intense nationalism, these were used by later leaders in very harmful ways. The Meiji leaders themselves may not have wanted that outcome, but the system they built made it possible.
What about Korea and China? How do they see the Meiji Restoration today?
That is a very sensitive topic. For Japan, the Meiji Restoration is often a source of national pride. It is seen as proof of Japanese strength and intelligence. But for Korea and China, this period is connected to painful memories of invasion, colonization, and war. Korea was formally colonized by Japan in 1910, just a few decades after the Meiji Restoration began. Many Koreans suffered greatly under Japanese colonial rule.
So the same event means very different things depending on where you stand.
Precisely. And that gap in understanding is still with us today. The historical memory of this period continues to affect the relationships between Japan, Korea, and China. Questions about apology, recognition of past suffering, and historical education are still debated very seriously in all three countries.
Are there parts of the Meiji system that still exist in Japan today?
Yes, in many ways. The basic structure of the Japanese government, with the emperor as a symbol and a parliamentary system, has its roots in the Meiji Constitution of 1889. The education system, the national railway culture, the strong work ethic, and even many aspects of Japanese corporate culture can be traced back to the values and systems established during the Meiji era. Japan today is in many ways still shaped by decisions made over 150 years ago.
It is remarkable how much one period of history can shape a country for so long.
That is true for every country, not just Japan. The past does not disappear. It lives inside the institutions, the laws, the habits, and the stories that people tell about themselves. Understanding the Meiji Restoration helps us understand not just Japan, but the whole modern history of East Asia.
So after everything we have discussed, how should we think about the Meiji Restoration?
I think we should think about it honestly. It was a remarkable achievement. A country that could have been colonized chose a different path. It studied, it worked extremely hard, and it transformed itself. That takes real courage and real intelligence.
But it also caused a lot of harm.
Yes, the same energy and ambition that built modern Japan also led to war and colonization across Asia. Both things are true at the same time. History is rarely simple. It is almost never just good or just bad.
What can we learn from this story today?
I think we can learn that modernization and justice are not the same thing. A country can become very powerful without becoming fair or peaceful. The real challenge for any society is not just to grow strong, but to use that strength in a way that respects other people and other nations.
That feels very relevant even today.
It does. The questions that Japan faced in the 1800s, how to respond to outside pressure, how to balance tradition and change, how to build national strength without becoming aggressive. These are questions that many countries are still asking right now. The Meiji Restoration is not just old history. It is a mirror that we can hold up to the present.
Thank you for walking through all of this. It was a lot to take in, but it makes much more sense now.
These stories deserve to be told carefully and fully. Japan changed the world, and the world is still living with the results of that change. We hope this documentary helped you see that story more clearly. Thank you for watching.